Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing. It is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. We all know the hymn, Amazing Grace. It was written by John Newton, a self-proclaimed wretch. He was a captain of a boat that engaged in the slave trade. On one of his voyages, his boat was caught in a violent storm, and when it seemed that the ship would sink, he cried out to God, "Lord, have mercy upon us." And God saved him not only from the physical storm, but more importantly, from the spiritual storm in his life. If you look at the life of John Newton, he was not the type of person that you would expect to write the hymn, Amazing Grace. I believe that he himself was so amazed of the grace he received because he had done nothing to deserve it. Jesus uses many stories in the Bible to tell us how amazing the grace of God is. In the parable of the vineyard workers, Jesus told of a farmer who hired people to work his vineyards. Some were hired at sunrise, some at morning, some at lunchtime, some in the afternoon, and some an hour before the end of the day. There was no problem until they received their wages. The workers who worked for an hour received the same amount as what those who had worked the whole day. I remember when I first read the parable, I did not understand the story. So I sympathized with the workers who worked the full day. I could not see the logic why they were paid the same amount as those who worked lesser hours. The employer contradicted everything known about fair wages. It made no economic sense. It made no business sense. It made no labor relations sense. However, I later realized that that was precisely the intention of the parable. It was not to make any sense in a world where grace is not common. This parable tells us that God gives gifts, not wages. God gives based on His goodness and not our works, for none of us gets paid according to merit. For none of us comes close to satisfying God's perfect standards. And if we receive based on our work, we would all go to hell. Yet we did not get what we deserved. We deserved punishment, but we got forgiveness. We deserve God's wrath, but we receive God's amazing grace. In the book of Hosea, God asks the prophet Hosea to marry a woman named Gomer to demonstrate His love for Israel. Gomer abandoned Hosea and their family to live with another man. Then she became a prostitute, and it is during this time that God gives the shocking command to Hosea. Go and love your wife again, even though she commits adultery with another lover. This will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel, even though the people have turned to other gods and love to worship them. Hosea took Gomer back and loved her again. Gomer did not get what she deserved, but she got grace. There are times we read the Bible and see ourselves in the stories. We are the lost sheep, the prodigal son loved by the father, and the servant whose huge debt was forgiven. We are the beloved ones of God. We are the ones who receive God's amazing grace. There's a beautiful song, and it really touches one's heart. It describes how amazing God's grace is, and it goes, "There's nothing you can do to make Him love you more, and there's nothing that you have done that will make Him close the door. Because of His great love, He gave His only Son. Everything has been done so you could come." God gives grace because of who He is. It does not depend on what we have done. In fact, there are many characters in the Bible who received grace despite of what they had done. David committed murder and adultery. Peter was a disciple who denied Jesus 3 times. And Paul was a chief sinner who persecuted Christians but received grace to be God's apostle to the Gentiles. And what have you done in the past? Gambled, drugs, alcohol, adultery? The stories in the Bible tells us that it has always been God who makes the first move. He is the father who runs to meet his prodigal son, the landlord who cancels a servant's huge debt, an employer who pays vineyard workers based on his goodness. God's grace is amazing because it does not make sense if you try to understand it from a world where grace is given for a price. It is a contradiction because grace would not be grace if you earned or paid for it. In this world, grace is dependent on the other person's action or work rather than who the giver is. But this is what makes God's grace so amazing. It's all about the character of God. It's all about who God is. Grace is all about our amazing God and His great love for us. Good night. To God be the glory.